G'day and welcome to the Campfire Project. Today I'm here with Joseph McGuire, who is a facial analysis expert. How are you, Joseph?
I'm very well indeed, Alan. Great to see you again.
Great to see you as well. And Rebecca Maas, who is a certified parent coach. How are you, Rebecca?
Doing well, thanks. Looking forward to a chat.
Fantastic. And we would have had Elizabeth here as well, who is an international certified life coach and mumpreneur, but she just sent us a message to say her car's broken down. So she may pop in, but we'll see what happens as we go along. But the conversation that we were just having off screen a moment ago was talking about the subject that is on all of our hearts at the moment, and that is the melding of personal and business lives over recent years. And this was something that Rebecca, as a parent coach, that you could see quite a few issues in this area. So would you like to start us off on the conversation?
Yeah. So things that I've seen in the business and just in folks' lives, family, friends, etc., over the past couple of years is really how being in one place has kind of brought everything on top of ourselves. So what we used to have boundaries for, they're all kind of meshing and intermingling and looking at what does that mean really for families when business comes in, and what does it mean for the business when our families come in? Of course, there's more pieces to the puzzle than just those two distinct ones, but to what extent can we make progress with ourselves and our issues in communication and resolve those on the business front as well?
Excellent. And Joseph, you've been working with people with issues at work, and even though you're as a profiler, you don't work directly with businesses in that way. But what have you found over the period of time?
Yeah, well, as I was saying offline, in Ireland we had the longest lockdown in Europe, so people were like at times there was one extended period where we weren't supposed to go beyond 2 kilometers from our home. I think you're probably dealing in miles, but 2 kilometers is just over. I think it's just about a mile and a half. So it was very, very, very restricted. And what I found was coming to me organically was people who were in lockdown with people they thought they knew and loved, whether that was husbands, wives, partners, or just close housemates, and realizing that they had some serious issues between them because they were in far closer proximity for far longer than they had ever been accustomed to, and there was almost literally no breathing space between them, and serious issues arising. So I wasn't there as a relationship coach, because that's not a relationship, or counselor, because that's not what I do. But I was helping people recognize from their facial profiles, etc., that how to communicate, how to bridge the gaps, and how to start to diminish the tension and the stress internally as well as between the people. And I wasn't directly, I never came in direct contact with it, but I was very aware of the statistics that were being presented in terms of the levels of domestic violence, both here and in the UK, the number of children being referred to hospitals because of domestic violent incidents, the levels of abuse from excess alcohol, the levels of divorce. Divorce applications went up in Ireland, certainly, and mainly instigated by women. And there was one other particular statistic I came across back, I think, in March 2020 from Great Ormond Street Hospital in London, where they said there was an increase of something like 3,000% in children referred to them for traumatic head injuries resulting from domestic incidents. So all of that's pretty horrendous, pretty scary stuff. So we clearly have a lot of work to do to resolve that, never mind the underlying issues which brought all those things to a head, no pun intended.
Yeah, well, that 3,000%, that's 30 times more than what they'd had in the previous year. So it's scary what being in close quarters when we haven't been trained to be in close quarters. As you said, Joseph, being profilers, and that what we do is we help people to understand their own personalities and how to understand somebody else and be able to communicate more effectively. And that's one thing that I noticed was the need for us to be able to understand ourselves first of all, and what our triggers are, and then how to understand the other person, and then know how to talk to them so that we don't trigger issues between us.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a huge need here. What you're talking about is really communication aids, in the fact that we do need that village around us to support us. And when you're just in that small confine of what 2 to 6 people will say,
Mm.
how that constant uh, that lock-in space really changes the way that our brains react and our feelings on in ourselves. So being able to read others' faces and understand, I have this sense that a lot of that feeling of defensiveness is just coming from the confinement in itself and
Mm.
feeling trapped, which all obviously is going to play on the communication there. So reaching out and knowing that there are folks out there, even if we're not physically in presence,
Mm.
still being able to work through those issues, that's been a trauma for the entire globe, really.
Mm. Yeah, because I see the confinement being the actual problem itself, but when it hits, we're looking at the other person as being the problem, and that's when it get when no wonder we don't get a solution, simply because we're not looking at where the problem actually is. We're looking at the symptom, which was okay because of the confinement. We've been under pressure, and because of that stress is built up, and we're not communicating properly. Then the other person is a problem. Whereas a lot of those things would never have happened without the confinement.
Yeah, and it can
Yeah,
be too easy sometimes to blame others.
Mm.
But taking that 100% responsibility and just realizing, you're the one who you can control yourself, and being able to make those steps in how you're going to react to a certain situation.
yeah, and unfortunately, so many people over an extended period of time have never learned any of that. They've never learned to really manage themselves. They've never learned to look inside to manage their emotional state, and so many people are effectively numbed because of spending their time dealing with, or not dealing with, but engaging with their devices, whether it's phones, computers, etc., and they're not. So many people are unable to communicate in a meaningful way. I think I said this in a previous conversation, Alan, but my older daughter, she's 33 now, but a few years ago, she was in a long distance relationship, and she was telling me that they were having issues. And I asked, "Do you talk much?" And she said, "Yeah, we text every day." And
Mm,
oh, so
Mm.
so many people rely on text where you don't get the tonality, you don't get the color, you don't get the emotion unless it's a straight ahead blast. So you're not getting what people are really feeling or how they're feeling, and there's such a vacuum there, which creates that potential or facilitates that potential for frustration, aggression, and all of the dissatisfaction.
and those texts can be interpreted in so many different ways. They can
Mm.
totally mean something different depending on the receiver's um,
That's it.
emotions at the moment, or whatever they
Yeah.
think is being said, and that might not be. We have a good line where we try to act like it never happened, essentially, if it's in a text, because you don't really know until you're in person having that conversation what the intention was and how they meant for it to come across.
That's right. If I get
Yeah.
emails from people, if it's anything other than instructions on how to get to a location or a meeting time or something like that, then I won't get involved in it. Even if I see a post on Facebook or something like that, I'm not going to jump in and become part of the problem. What I'll do is I'll actually get in touch with a person and say, hey, let's have a chat, and at least get some, turn it into a conversation with the audio. And if I can get them on Zoom, or I can actually see them in real life, then I've got the
Yeah.
visual as well. Get the whole story, not just
Mm.
a small part of it. But as you said, we had the problems in the confinement and everything else and then we looked at the confinement as being it was not really the problem. The confinement was the trigger. it highlighted the problem that we weren't communicating properly in the first place anyway.
Absolutely. And again, so many people hadn't learned to do it. They'd no real prior preparation for a circumstance like that. And then it's inevitable that, you know, things are going to surface. There's almost no way around that. So that's another, certainly an issue in Ireland, that's a massive issue because there are no real support services, certainly at official level. Like I remember talking with a friend of mine, she's an occupational therapist, and her role was to go visit people in their homes in the community. And again, this is going back like 4 or 5 years. And she was telling me that in every quarter, the reports, the cost of the reports she would have to do and the cost of her time, etc., amounted to something like €250,000. And the reports she had to do were mandatory, but there was nobody to follow up on the reports. And I don't know, I suspect it may not be exactly the same in other jurisdictions, but I suspect there's similar problems elsewhere too.
It comes back to the fact that we've got all the authorities who want these reports doing exactly the same thing that everybody else was doing, being stuck on their devices, because all they're doing is ticking boxes on their computers. We've got to have this report. Well, I've got the report now. What do you do with the report? You know, you put it in the file, you know, because we had to have the report. So again, the people who are trying to highlight find solutions to the problems are doing exactly the same thing as the people who have got the problems in the first place.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and then you've got people in the bureaucracies. Like again, when I was a therapist for 30 years, and I was treating a lot of senior managers in our national health services, so-called, and they were telling me like they were individually getting in the region of about 300 to 400 emails per day. So there's no possible way of dealing with that and sifting through the absolute priorities, because you're going to spend so much time just sifting through it and filtering out, never mind actually getting anything done.
There's some statistics that are coming out of Canadian research regarding the ACEs studies, and it shows that what they call serve and return communication is actually one of the most indicative factors in resilience for the brain. So when babies get that serve and return, they're going to obviously grow into that capacity to discuss the issues at hand and talk about emotions and different things that come up in groups of people. Though for those who have not had that serve and return as their form of growth, I think this is where a lot of this comes from. And I wonder what you're talking about in these bureaucracies where there's so much paperwork done, how much progress could be made if we sat down and actually had a well-meaning conversation with that person.
Yeah, because again, with that documentation, we're relying on the text as, you know, to give us all the information, but we're not getting down and having conversations to get to the root causes of issues and helping and guide people through. Because as your role as a parent coach, you're going to be sitting down, having those conversations and delving deeper into where the problems are, and then discussing those with the parents so that they can understand each other. That's the sort of thing that I believe that we probably need more of. How much do you see that happening, or is it only with people like yourselves that is happening?
You know, I think that can happen all around at any stage with any person's profession. The thing is, we need to take time to do it. And some folks during the past couple of years have realized that, and have realized that actually getting into maybe a bit longer, a little bit deeper conversation really illuminates. So I have hope that that realization is out there. And for folks who feel like so much pressure on top of them, busy, 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 folks who are in the professions to bring those conversations to them. The helping professions are swamped with requests at the moment. And that's just goes to show how much we really need community and to build community with with our near neighbors, with our families who maybe we don't see all that often, but really to strengthen those ties of our village.
Mm. Yeah, because I can see with the number, the percentage increases that Joseph, you were saying, and that exist over there in Ireland, or 30 times as many instances, that sitting down and having conversations becomes quite difficult because we've got the time factor.
Yeah.
And so the end result is the more instances where we have increases in issues, the more that we're going to be relying on documentation and not conversations because of the lack of time. So the people that are out there running the groups that are trying to help, like the government, etc., they're at a catch-22 as well, finding it very difficult to be able to do things. So it comes back to community being able to create things. And it may not be one-on-one conversations to start with, but group conversations, having webinars or group online where people can come in, turn their cameras off and not be seen, not put their name on, etc., and listen and become part of it, where they can have that secrecy, so nobody knows who they are, and therefore they can sort of step up and listen more and get involved. And then when they're ready, open up and say, hey, this is me, I've got a problem, who do I talk to?
Yeah, and there needs to be those resources available, both in terms of the time, the skilled people, and obviously the money to fund all of that. Unless people are doing it voluntarily, which probably very few people can actually afford to do. Again, just referring to the Irish situation, I was talking with a friend of mine recently, and he's on the board of a charity called CARI, and they're basically, what they do is they support families affected by suicide, and they actually have a premises which would allow them to see up to 150 people or 150 families per week if they had the money to pay for the counselors, the psychotherapists. But they're only able to see 50 families per week, and that means that's the 50 families over a year, because it's pretty much a 1 year process. But they have a backlog of something like 3 years of families waiting, and God knows what state those families will be in by the time anybody gets to see them. So we have certainly, again, and obviously talking about Ireland, we have a massive crisis on our hands already, and bigger ones looming unless we learn to deal with them. And again, so much of it comes back to learning to communicate, as you were saying, Rebecca, from such an early age. So there's such a fundamental need for babies to be learning, and for families to learn how to communicate with the babies and have that two-way connection, so that babies can express themselves and then build that through the generations. But it's a massive, massive load of work.
Yeah, so I'm seeing with the, well, as I say, our future is pretty much put in place within the first 7 years of life, all those experiences that we go through. So if we're looking at teaching the children when they get to school, they're 5 years old by that stage, so there's 5 years of imprinting, which is already putting them down the wrong path if they've been in isolation in those more appalling situations. So we need to get to it before that. We need to get to the parents in the early stages, or even before they have children. So when couples first get together, being able to make that awareness. I see there's an opportunity here for coaches to get involved in the first case and start running more broader information sessions where they have a lot of people online together. They can give information that people can then go away and start to try. And from that, they can also build their business with those that do come back and say, hey, I need more support. And then they can work with them as well. So I can see that's another area. This is how we can fix some of the numbers. If we're relying on the government to provide, there's not enough money, and there's not enough resources in people and all the rest of it to be able to provide that support. So unless the rest of us get involved, it's not going to get any better. It's just going to get worse and worse. And so
I agree that it takes intention of of every member of the community really to make these things happen. And I'm a firm believer in neuroplasticity, that we can change our brains no matter the age. So it's
Yeah.
not like if it didn't happen when I was a kid, it's never going to happen, but it
Mm,
might take a little longer. It might take
mm,
some effort, yet it is still possible to really have deeper conversations and really connect on a level that fulfills our souls and fills our cups
mm,
and allows us to enjoy what we're doing on a day-to-day basis.
mm. Yeah, 'cause I know that, as you said, you can change at any point in your life, but the older you are, the harder it becomes because of the programming you've had before. But I think if you look at a lot of us in the Campfire project, and I look at myself on that score, there has been a lot of changing of the wiring of the brain in things that we've been doing. Just being part of the Campfire project and having these discussions has had a massive impact on me alone. So I know that it can be changed, but the sooner we change it, the easier it is to make those
Mhm.
changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that issue of neuroplasticity is a hugely important one, because again, some of that conditioning says that we can't change. It's
Mm,
this is how I am, and this is my identity, blah blah blah. And that's part of the illusion so many people buy into. And we can certainly all learn at any stage, as long as we're open and willing and receptive to it, rather than programmed into this one track life that
mm,
so many people do leave. So that is, I mean, that's hugely encouraging. And there are various therapies and therapists out there who have the skills to help people change very, very quickly, rather than being this prolonged process of almost like hamster wheel stuff, which I guess many of us have seen over the years. So it encourages me to see um, younger people like Rebecca really alert to all of this, and just being on the front line, helping to facilitate change at an earlier stage, at an earlier age for people. That has to be hugely encouraging. Alan and myself are obviously veterans, so we're doing our bit and spreading the word as we can. But it's great to see the younger people who have that
mm,
awareness and the fire as well to really get things moving in a different way.
But
Mhm.
it's all generations needing to have those conversations, because we've done it because we're here with the Campfire Project. We've got such a wide range of ages of people. We're taking that to the children, taking it right down to the younger level. So parents now able to communicate with their children in a new way. We've got this stigma of what we're supposed to be and everything else. I know what I was taught when I was growing up about what it was to be a man and everything else. The pressure that put then on, if I wasn't performing, then that had an impact on me. The egos, I think a lot of issues that come up between people, it's based on the egos and feeling that they're failing, so therefore they'll strike out, etc. But it's getting to the point of realizing that as far as our education system went, yes, we were taught mathematics and English and things like that, but we weren't really taught how to communicate. In class, it was always sit there and shut up and listen and learn, and only answer questions when you're asked. And so we didn't. It was question and answer. It was never communication. There was never a conversation. And I think that's one area that we need to get back more to real. And by understanding that we were never taught that, then we can put aside the feeling that we've failed, because you can't fail at something you were never taught.
That's one of the biggest things that we come up with is, folks who are really learning this communication for the first time as a parent. They're realizing that what they're doing isn't working with their kids, and this has never been modeled to them. So it's like a new awakening, like, okay, well, there's another way to do it. Let's try this way. And it oftentimes brings around in even a couple of weeks, just changing what you're doing. And one of the biggest things we say is at least 15 minutes a day, really paying close attention and playing with your child. That's going to build their serve and return, that back and forth communication, engage their creativity, and really boost the happy chemicals in their brain. That is what wires the system.
Mm. Well, thinking about some of the responses, we say, okay, having those conversations with the kids, and then we've got parents who are going, but I've got all these pressures of my business and other things, the work I have to do. How do we address that one with them? How do we help them to realize that by spending that time, they're actually saving time?
Mm. Yeah, that's so true. Exactly what you're saying. 15 minutes out of 24 hours is not a lot of time.
Hmm.
And it brings us back to the question of why did we choose to have kids in the first place? Really making sure that we value those beings and knowing that exactly they're there for the long run.
Yeah, well, I jokingly say that, I'm still trying to figure out why I had my 3 sons, but I am proud of what the men they've become. It's you have to ask those questions why we do the things that we do. Life doesn't happen to us; it's the decisions we make that produce our life.
Yeah, and it's also that realization that if we do put in that 15 minutes, or hopefully a bit longer in many cases, it actually nurtures us as business people,
Mm.
because it fills it stimulates that sense of humanity and that sense of interconnectedness. It stimulates a sense of play, creativity, and it allows us to communicate and engage with our colleagues, our employees, or our customers in an altogether more human way. And that has become increasingly essential over the last number of years.
Mm.
Certainly the number of business people I'm talking to who regard the relationship bit first as the most important bit, then the business bit comes in. But the relationship bit is so increasingly important in people's lives, and more people I'm talking to are recognizing that that is the first thing, and the rest falls into place once the relationships are solid. So that whole idea of the 15 minutes, yeah, I mean that has to be an absolute bottom line.
Mm.
Just that's non-negotiable. It has to be.
Yeah, I think when people are able to understand the flow-on effect that has, and as you said, the connection to business, because we're talking about the melding of our personal and business lives. In the business side of things, I know we keep hearing things like, work on your business and not in your business. The only way for a business person to do that is if the people in the business are working in the business, and so that you can, with confidence, walk away knowing that they're going to keep working, not that they need to be micromanaged. So you've got to be there all the time, so you're stuck in the business. So in doing that, they've got to feel that they're trusted, they belong, that they're valued. So that comes back to having that relationship with them. And then and they're always going to be suspicious as well if you start changing what you're doing all of a sudden, and trying to start doing that from just being it's all about the KPIs type attitude. But a good place to actually practice that for your business is starting with your family and getting used to that, because that's just a conversation. Is they want to have a better life. And so there is nothing there that they feel that, oh, you're doing this because you're going to make more money. In the workplace, they may think that, but if you practice that at home, you build the skill of connection and communication, so that it becomes a natural thing when you go into the workplace, and they see the change when you walk through the door. It's not like you come into work and then you switch that on to connect with your staff and your colleagues, etc. But you've already walked in with that attitude, and you're starting to walk in with smiles and talking to people and getting into conversations. As I've always said, if you want to look after your customers, you have to look after your staff first, because that's the best way to look after your customers. You put your staff first, you're obviously putting your customers first, because the staff are the ones going to impact on the customers.
Yeah. Go for it, Rebecca.
As well
Yeah.
as really honoring, that's honoring their individuality as well, and their capability to innovate. And each person comes to that situation with a different perspective, and sometimes we just need a little bit of conversation to really flush out what idea could maybe be saving us time in the long run, or could be more receptive to a different group of people, or really working that together in that relationship for the business, but also getting our families together in communication along the lines too.
Yeah, well, the parents just working with the children, if they can use this in the conversations they're having as a way of finding out how well their children have learnt from them. So it's no longer a case of, I've just got to figure out how to talk to the kids, but it's having conversations with them, and they can use it from, okay, have they learnt what I've been trying to teach them? Therefore, in that they haven't, then, well, how do I turn that, change that? How do I redirect and talk to them in a way in which I get the message across that I want to do? So in everything, if we want to know how well we've done it, we've got to get feedback. So they can use that in the conversations with their children and think of it as, I'm getting feedback from my children at first. Anything that we can do to get the conversation started, because we find that once we get conversations, we start to connect with somebody, we just start to connect. So we're getting the outcome. We tell them, go and connect with their kids. They go, this is too hard. But if you say, right, have a conversation with them, find out whether they've, how to get the message across so they do what it is that you want them to do, we're starting to change the way they're doing things. We're starting to get into conversations. Because in business, if I want a business person says to me, look, I've got problems with our staff, I've got to improve the culture, I need them to do these things. I usually say to them, well, if I can get you to do this around them, then they will do, they will change. What they don't realize is they think they're actually, by doing something different, they're changing their staff. What they're really happening is, by doing something different, they're changing themselves. And that change then impacts on the staff and they get the results they want. But if I said to them, hey, I'm going to change you so that your staff are changed, not going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. So subtly, absolutely. Yeah. And when we do that, when we build those relationships like that, then that increases trust, it increases respect, gives people a sense of autonomy, all those things that have been lacking when people start talking about like the great resignation or the great unsettling, as it's also been referred to, those qualities that people have been crying out for. So when we actually engage with them as human and understand something about their lives and acknowledge it, it changes that whole dynamic, which changes the internal dynamic, which then changes the ripple effects within the family and the community. So like a lot of it isn't like a lot of it isn't rocket surgery. It's rocket science. Sorry, I've been watching too many strange comedies.
Missing a metaphor there.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I need a bit of something there, but yeah. So it doesn't have to be terribly complicated. But once we recognize the human dimension within ourselves and our needs as humans, not just as employers and business people, it just changes the whole flow and the whole pattern. Yeah.
So I like the term you just used in, the great unsettling, as opposed to the great resignation, because the great resignation was talking about people, changing jobs, being unhappy with their work environment. But what caused that in the first place was being unsettled. And that unsettlement not only is in the workplace, but it's in the home as well. And I think looking at the terms that we're using and always asking, well, in sales, I always ask, ask why 5 times. If they say something, and why that, trying to get closer to the root cause of it. We need to be doing that more and more, and looking at the, when we come up with these, nice little catch cries like the great resignation, etc. Ask, well, where'd that come from? What's behind that? And keep looking behind each door to see deeper and deeper into it. And then we get to where we need to make the changes. And the more that we're focusing on that, the more that we're invested in making that change as well. So when we find the root cause, we can then put our egos and other things aside and go, okay, well, if I want to get this change, this is what I need to do. So I can then be in control, or feel that I've taken control of my life or my situation. I can control how I impact on others. I can't control them, but I can control the way I impact on them, which will cause a change in them.
There's a knowledgeable doctor in the studies of positive parenting who says that when our children, and we could use employees as well, kind of in place of this here, but when they feel safe, seen, and soothed, then you can really create that trusting connection.
Yeah, I think just as you were saying that, I was thinking, as we talk about our children and the staff and that, being like the children, it's like family. Our children are our family. Instead of looking at the individual, look at the collective, and to work with the children, for children to be happier and everything else. The family is happier. And so if I look at the people I work with, and that I see them as family, I don't see them as children, but I see them as family, and I go, right, I want to create that greater connection, because I know if they're happy, well, in a business sense, if they're happy, they're going to be more productive. And the more productive they are, and the more they're invested in the work they're doing, the more I can then step away to work on the business. And therefore, bring that same analogy back into the family. The more I, work with the rest of the family, my partner, my children, the happier they're going to be, which then frees me up to be able to do more on, where I want to take the family. If it's a man, for instance, and we're all being taught how to bring in the resources, now we're going to have that free mind to be able to work on the resources, but still have that strong connection with the family, which is the reason why we're bringing the resources in the first place. And we don't have the disconnection. And I think it's a disconnection that's caused a lot of our issues, because we didn't know how to communicate.
Yeah, and certainly for our generation, a lot of that was some very deep conditioning involved in that. And thankfully in both of our cases, we've learned to change a lot of it, and we've learned to become a lot more adaptable and flexible, having crashed into a few walls in our time too. But we begin to see, we have begun to see the importance of opening up and taking off the armor, and recognizing that we are, like, the reality is we are all part of a big continuum of the human species is one continuum, and we are all connected, even though we like to think of ourselves as these precious little individuals. Once we begin to see that and open up to that, and open up that whole heart connection, then so many things are possible.
No, I think
that's reinforcing Alan's distinction between being a man and being the man. Where there obviously we need a larger group of us in order to make things happen. So it's not just one.
It's it.
Oh,
So when you are the man and that you're wearing that armor, and as I said before, you're in a competitive state, you're always on tender hooks, you're always watching out for who's coming over your shoulder. I don't see that as strength at all. I see that as a very frustrating place to be. But when you take your armor off, that's when you show your real strength, because the armor there was to protect the vulnerable parts. If you think of knights in the back in the day, the armor they had was to protect themselves from injuries, etc. But if you've got the power in yourself, then you don't need that armor to protect yourself anymore.
Yeah, and if you think of it too, like, that armor was an enormously heavy weight. So it was actually weighing them down as well. It was protecting them and weighing them down and keeping them so restricted. So the basic analogy of armor is telling us so. It's so revealing, and it is that when we take off the armor, it gives us so much flexibility. It allows us to move much more freely, and that's not just physically, but it allows us to open our minds, open our hearts in a whole different way, and realize, oh, I don't have to be that way. I don't have to behave like that. I have all these other options, and it can actually be a lot more fun, a lot more enjoyable, and I can build so many better relationships as a result.
Because then you can look at it and go, okay, well, there is so much more things that I can do, so I can now try this in the relationship. And it's not a matter of, with your partner, you can then say, well, look, I'm more flexible now. I've got more understanding. And they're looking for the change as well. So I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves that this is why it's always going to be that way. And it will be if we're wearing armor, because we're limiting, as you said, we're limiting our movement and everything else, physically and emotionally. So the more that we can free ourselves up, the more we can try new things, and then we can start working's not probably the right word, but working with other people with that new attitude, and therefore let go of what we've done in the past. Because I know a lot of people will say, oh, I'm worried about the shame and everything else, because if I do remove that armor, then I'm going to notice the things that I did that were wrong. Well, you've only just noticing it now, you've taken the armor off. You obviously didn't notice that when you were wearing the armor, and you made the decisions that you made without the knowledge of that alternative. So why should you be ashamed of yourself when you didn't have the knowledge to make a better decision? You made a decision with the information you had. So you don't have to be the tough bloke and everything else. And I think this is where a lot of problems come from, when somebody feels challenged, that their impression of themselves is not as good as they want it to be. And they restrict themselves in that way and cause a lot of problems in themselves, which then flows on to, dissatisfaction around other people and violence and other things that come out of them. It's one of the reasons why with the Campfire project, having one-on-one conversations, the number of people who have come in have held those beliefs, and that have all of a sudden opened up and let things out, and you can just see the weight coming off them, and you can see them realizing they have a greater ability without the armor than when they're holding that armor around them.
Yeah, I think you're saying that when we change ourselves, the circumstances change. And once again, that importance of 100% responsibility. There's always new things to learn, right? So when we do that inner work, or some people might call it the shadow work, when we really truly find ourselves, then we can reflect that in the environment.
So as far as bringing your work life and your personal life together, and the interactions with all the people around you, it can be done, and quite effectively, when you change the way in which you're looking at it at the moment. As I say, that if it's not going the way that you want it to go, and there's fights, there's arguments within the household, etc., and you want that to change, then by letting that armor go and going, okay, I don't have shame for not doing a better job. Now that I've got new information, I can apply that new information. So I know I can move forward. So it's not an away from motivation, but a towards motivation, where I'm moving towards what it is I want to create. And the conversations and the way you think can change completely, and it can be done in the click of the fingers. Just because you make a different decision.
Absolutely. And when we cultivate a sense of curiosity, then again, it opens so much potential within relationship, because when we're programmed to react, somebody says or does something we don't like for whatever reason, if we're programmed to react against it, automatically it's stress within and it's stress between the people. But if we're simply curious and willing to, or at least willing to start practicing curiosity, and I know certainly I had to learn to start practicing it, because it didn't just come automatically. Okay, I'm curious. Why did you do it that way, or why did you do that? It's really curious, rather than, oh, you shouldn't have. When we approach it with curiosity, people feel heard, they feel listened to, and it's one of the primary human needs. And then when they feel listened to, there's no aggression in the situation. They're just giving information. They're giving an explanation. Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of doing it like that, or I never thought of that. And have you maybe thought of? And when we approach a dialogue like that, and again, it does take practice and training. It depends, and obviously, if we've come from an altogether different place, it's going to take a lot of training and practice. But when we do it, it just creates a sense of openness and a sense of play and creativity. And again, opening up our own imagination to what's possible, and that doesn't just apply in the domestic situation, because when we start to approach things with curiosity, we then start to find, oh, there are other options business-wise as well. And when we apply it then to playing with our kids, like the 15 minutes or hopefully longer, and our kids do something, why did you do it that way? Rather than you shouldn't have. Then again, it's getting back into that whole neuroplasticity thing that you were talking about, Rebecca. It's rewiring our brains to think and behave and perceive in a whole different way.
And this thing you're bringing up about the depth of listening here, this is really one of the most satisfying ways to connect on a human level, is to be seen, to be heard and understood with true empathy, especially when we're seeing things differently from a different perspective. And that's why we're all here. All of our unique individualities will see things differently.
Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be to agree with somebody, but just to be willing to explore.
Mm. That's it. It's the more that you understand other people, the less pressure there is on you, on yourself. And if there's less pressure on you, then the way in which you behave towards others changes as well, which means there's less pressure on them as well, and their response back to you. This is how you know, because if you keep putting the pressure on, you're spiraling down the drain pipe. Whereas if you do it the other way, you're bringing yourself back out of the drain pipe. And, you know, once you're out of there, you're just opening your life up. Excuse me.
That's a cheerful image, going up and down a drain pipe.
Mm.
It does reflect on the kind of the intensity of the situation.
course.
And in
Of
that
course it does.
conversation, you can almost,
Yeah.
you can feel that pressure change in the direction you're getting pulled down or, you know, lightening up. You can really actually even witness that way.
Yeah, and I use that drain pipe analogy because if you think of drain pipe, the pipe itself is the same all the way through, but when you feel yourself getting into the depths when you're going down the spiral, but when you're coming back out, it doesn't give you a great change at first because you feel like you're still confined in that pipe. But once you get to the opening at the top, it just expands right out because now there's no pipe, there's no restriction to it. And this is where the practice comes in, the practice of getting up the pipe. And then once you're starting to perfect that, more to the point, once you're starting to notice what you've been doing and you notice you're getting results, then it just starts to expand really fast. And so, and as far as the drain pipe goes, it probably depends on whether you're on the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere, if you're going clockwise or anti-clockwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me, my mind works in curious ways and goes off on all sorts of tangents, but it reminds me of the fact that so often when we're feeling stressed and uptight, so many of us are not aware of the fact that our bodies are impacted and we're locked in up here, and we're not tuned into the fact that our body is telling us something, that something in our behavior is not helping us, never mind the people we're engaging with, whether it's our employees, our partners, our kids. When we start to feel physically uptight and notice it, it's telling us, oh, I need to change something here in me. But so many people are not tuned into that at all.
Yeah, because any messages we get that come through in that way are for our benefit. So the more that we're starting to able to notice those, and we can't notice those if we've got that protection around us, that armor, because you said before, we're restricted in our movement and we're restricted in our thoughts. So it's deciding to make a decision. Okay, am I happy with the situation I'm in? No, I'm not. Okay, what do I need to do to start to change that? And you might go, well, my partner is, I'm just not getting on with my partner. The partner's got the problem. Well, no, it's a communication between the two of you that's the problem. It's not them, it's not you. Once we start looking at what's the interaction, because we've got a partner, we're interdependent, we're individuals, but we're also got that connection between us. And the communication, again, is the most important thing. So we can take the blame off, pointing at the finger at the other person, saying, no, they're the fault, and then pointing the finger at you, saying that, no, you're the fault. We can go, right, no, it's obviously that we're not communicating. It's a communication between us. It's outside of us. It's not us as being the problem. It's the way that we're communicating this problem. I can change the way I can communicate very easily. I may not be able to change my appearance and by space that I'm taking up, but I can change the way in which I respond to people, which therefore changes my environment and changes their behavior as well in response.
I think one of the ways we can spin these past couple of years in a positive light is that what you say is that folks are realizing that and reaching out, which is why so many are swamped with those requests for help, right? So it's people are realizing that and willing to take the steps. They're not always sure what those steps look like. So I encourage any folks who are feeling like this to do some research and find someone to walk with you in that journey, because there are
Mm.
many organizations who are ready for that and who can help and assist. And daily there's new summits that are popping up online that we can even just watch from the comfort of our homes, that have a wealth of
Exactly.
knowledge and information, and there are resources out there that folks can access.
Mm. And with those uh, summits and everything else, this is where watching those, getting some ideas, and then talking to your partner as well, and saying, or even sitting down and watching some of those with your partner, to go, okay, let's discuss it. We've got a thing over here called Gogglebox, where you've got all the reality shows on the show, and you've got these people who are sitting there watching the reality shows, and it's a show about them watching the shows and their comments and everything goes. But what they're actually doing is sitting there together, looking at something else and discussing that. Like, I don't watch the show. I think it's mind numbing myself, but the concept behind it, that's what people can do. I think the fact that they're doing that, watching the shows and discussing the shows, is brilliant. The fact of me watching them, no, I'm going to do that. But although I think what they're doing is brilliant, more of us should be doing that ourselves with, learning from others, and then having discussions about it. And even if we don't agree with it, having those discussions. This is why we don't agree with it. But now we're communicating and we're talking. And at the same time, realizing that we want to find out what the other person feels about things. It's no longer having a necessity that I've got to be right.
Those different perspectives, are there to make life richer and really weave us together.
Excellent. Okay, well, just looking at the time as we move through, and these always go fast. The hour disappears very quickly. So, any final thoughts that you would like to? I don't like the word advice, but what thoughts would you like to leave with the people who are listening to this today, Rebecca?
So, the very first pillar of our program is self-care. And I really would like to encourage folks, the fact that you are having a conversation in your life that really gets to the depth is self-care. When you take the time to reach out and connect with others, you're receiving that as well. So, self-care doesn't only have to be go to the gym or various other things that we might get our mind stuck around in when we say self-care, but really filling your cup and keeping those connections for yourselves as well. So that would be my one thing for today.
Excellent. You've got to start somewhere. You start with yourself. Joseph.
Yeah, I've actually follow on directly from what Rebecca was saying there. I'm not into advertising, but the tagline for L'Oreal, because you're worth it, and giving ourselves the message to do something for ourselves every day because we're worth it. And it doesn't have to be something big, whether it's the 15 minutes playing with our kids, whether it's just listening to some music, whether it's watching nature, doing whatever it is for even a few minutes a day, because it brings us joy, because it brings us real pleasure. It's a starting point. And as long as we're making a start, and as long as we're making a start and building on it, then we're changing something within ourselves. We're releasing restrictions and stress within ourselves, and we're opening up to greater possibilities.
Excellent. And what I'd say to people is that we've had over, or must be about 180 panel discussions now on the Campfire project. That will keep you busy for quite a long time if you sit down and watch them. There's quite a few weeks of full-time watching. But what I'd recommend is, I like going back and listening to different ones and just thinking, well, how do I see that as well? Not whether I'm not looking just for a challenge. I'm not looking to see whether I agree with the people, but how do I understand what they've been talking about and how I would either modify that or directly input that into what I'm doing. And this is when you're listening to other people, you don't have to be doing anything. You can be, you can be preparing dinner. But if you've got those running, you can have those running while your family's around as well. And then from there, have conversations. And if you're trying to get your partner involved in listening to these as well, And look, especially for the women, if you're trying to get your husband to come along and listen, well, if you want to get them involved, the one that Scott did on Does Size Matter in the Bedroom, you can start with that one to get them involved in listening to the discussions. But it's a matter of being able to go through it, listen to it. You can see them by the titles in the PDF file that we've got in the file section. Lists the conversations, who was in it, and also so you can find your favourite people there to listen to them. But it also says what the subjects were that we were talking about. So, and then you can go, well, what's relating to what would impact on what I'm doing right now? Where do I want to make a change? Go and pull those ones out and have a listen to those. And once you start getting the habit of listening to those, you'll probably find you'll start listening to more and more of them. And then you can have discussions and conversations with your partner and even with your kids around those things. And there's more than 15 minutes a day very quickly that start to happen. But it's time that you have decided to invest yourself in, not just do because you have to do it.
Yeah, and it beats Gumbox.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Rebecca and Joseph, for being here today. And
thank you so much.
Just the three of us, it was still a very rich conversation.
Absolutely.
So
Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you.
To everybody else, I hope that the thoughts that we've left you with give you reason to think and decide to want to go and delve a little bit deeper into things. But it's as we've always said, it's your life and it's your decisions. So thanks everybody for listening in today, and thank Rebecca and Joseph for being here, and we'll see you all on the next campfire. Bye for now.
Yep.